Today I'm talking about the Gaulish language and how similar is it to the living Welsh language. Could Welsh speakers today understand Gaulish? If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you'll give me a like and subscribe. The history of these two languages in terms of the roots of their etymologies and how it evolved over time would have been quite similar. Gaulish evolved out of Proto-Celtic, out of the same branch of Celtic that created Brythonic and then later Welsh and Gaulish and Brythonic. Part of this is from the fact that words like maponos for sun evolved along the Welsh strain, ap. There's that P sound that stuck in these two languages, whereas in Irish that became mac. So there's a qua and p sound that differentiates. Gaulish had time to evolve as its own culture, its own language, and so did Welsh. And these were carried together in terms of there was a lot of trade across the channel, the British Channel or La Manche. And these languages would have been very understandable between each other. Julius Caesar even writes that these people may have spoken the same language. This may have been propaganda for him to attack Britain, but we don't know. In any case, it evolved on the periphery of the Roman world, and as it became conquered by Rome, it became more and more Latinized over the next 500 years until it was absorbed into Latin. Welsh, on the other hand, was not fully absorbed, but it did have this period of Latinization in which lots of Latin was being brought into the language, changing its syntax, its grammar, its vocabulary, and how they even thought about themselves, as exactly happened in Gaulish, but it didn't quite happen to the same extensivity that it happened in Gaulish. In the later stages of the Roman Empire in Gaul, you did have a lot of German tribes coming in. And this happened with Welsh as well. You had German tribes, these kind of barbarian invasions coming in. But the Welsh were able to resist this and keep their own linguistic communities. Gaulish was not. And so this is really the point in which these two deeply diverge. Gaulish did have some residual communities in the Massif Central, perhaps in the Alps, and perhaps in Amorica in the northwest, present-day Brittany. But they weren't big enough and populous enough to absorb new linguistic communities coming in. Welsh was, and that's the key difference, and from this point it diverges astronomically. So numbers are something that are going to be very similar between these languages, and this can be used to show us how similar they are, how mutually intelligible. Look at these ordinal numbers. We don't have much cardinal numbers, but we do have a calendar. See my Gaulish video for that calendar. But these 10 ordinal numbers give us a glimpse into how similar these are to Welsh. So Cyntuchos, and it's Cyntaf in Welsh, that's really similar. And then you get Ios or Alos, Isle in Welsh. I mean, that's practically the same word without that ending. But the one I really want to bring your attention to is the ordinal for fourth, Pedwaros. In Welsh, it's Pedwerydd. And this is so unique to these two languages that you get both the P sound, which denotes it as that branch of the Celtic people, and the T or D with a vowel between that and the R, which is very unique and indicates how similar they were, because in a lot of cases this would have swallowed that vowel, but the accent was on that vowel, which kept it separate in both these two languages, so the accent was in the same place. And going down, you get swechos, which became chweched. And these going through achtumos, nemitos, decametos, degved. These are quite farther apart, but they're recognizable as being the same thing, essentially. And the cardinal numbers, we don't have much, but you have the word tri, which is certainly attested, and it's the same exact number in Welsh. This doesn't mean that this would have carried forward. This is a massive time break we're having here between Welsh spoken today and the 1,000-year period in which Gaulish was spoken. So what about common words similar between these languages? Let's go outside to nature and show you how similar these languages are in terms of the basic words for natural things. Now I'm here in a grove because trees are something very similar between Welsh and Gaulish. You have werno, which would be alder, and in present day Welsh it's gwern, and there's this shift in sound. I'll get to that in a minute. You have dari or darwi, which was the word for tree or trees in Gaulish. Any Welsh speaker today, this will click in terms of what an oak tree is. And oh, it's a beautiful day, springtime day. Look at this. And these are very similar. So you have words which are recognizable, but they've definitely changed meaning over time from being trees to a specific kind of tree. I love springtime. One thing that differentiates Gaulish and Welsh is that Welsh went through a sound shift in which you have words like sam, the word for summer, in Gaulish became hab in Welsh, and this is in many different words in reference to Welsh and being compared with Irish. See my Irish video. And what happened is it was more of a sh sound, a sh, than an S sound or an H sound, and this over time got blurred between them, and the M at the end was very weak in Gaulish and became gradually a V sound, and this so sam became hav over time, and the same thing for old. Sen became hen. Once you know these rules, Gaulish becomes a bit easier for a Welsh speaker, but you would have to be educated in how that works. Another one is the word for servant or boy in Gaulish is vassal, which gives us the word today, vassal, in English. In Welsh, they very often attach gwa to the beginning of words. There are quite a few of these words in Welsh which translate directly into Gaulish, like verno is the word for alder tree, and it became gwern. Common nature words like glass for the color of fresh grass or light blue or green. is glastu in Gaulish, and you'd be clear what that meant from a Welsh speaker's perspective. Taru in Welsh is the same word in Gaulish. Bad is art. It becomes arth in Welsh. Coed, a group of trees, is the word for a wood in Gaulish. Ket. These are very similar, but would we be able to understand them today? Well, there's something called the case system, which means that very likely we wouldn't be able to understand them in every single case. One thing we do know is how different Gaulish was in terms of grammatical cases. Welsh doesn't have any grammatical cases like Latin, Romanian, or Polish does. We do have residual elements of the genitive, or the case which shows you who owns what in terms of the initial consonant mutation. See my video on Welsh and Cornish mutations. But it doesn't have the case system as Gaulish did. Gaulish had 7 cases, and I'll run through those with you now. So let's take the word for sun. Mapos. And this would change depending on what was happening to it or from it or with it, not in terms of word order, and that's a different thing. Welsh changes according to word order. Gaulish changed according to what was happening with the subject and the object. Welsh does too in mutations, but it's a different thing, and this would be very unfamiliar to Welsh speakers today. Let's go through the cases with the word mapos. So if you have the nominative, and that's basically who is being named and what it's the one doing things to other things, then mapos would retain mapos in most cases. But then if you were calling to the boy, the son, mapos would change. It would become mape. And if you were accusing it, or that child or boy of something, it would become mapon. Then if that boy was the owner of something, like you say apple, apple mapi, mapi apple. It doesn't matter where the words are because you have that ending. Welsh doesn't quite work in that way. And dative mapu, apple mapu, the boy going into the apple, if we're talking about a science fiction story or something. And you have instrumental, which is also mapu, which means that boy is by which something is happening as an instrument, which for a Welsh speaker would be completely alien. There's no real way to translate that directly into Welsh without a long explanation. And you have locative, which this is determining who is in what location, or is somebody going out of it or into it. And Welsh doesn't have anything like this. So this is one thing Welsh speakers would be like, well, what does that even mean? Because the word ending is changing in ways that doesn't correspond to anything in Welsh whatsoever. If you're asking if Welsh speakers could understand Gaulish, there's many things that you would understand, but anything related to cases and movement of the subject in a sentence, and Welsh speakers today would be pretty much lost for that. So let's go from that into something more simple, basic words. There are so many basic words that are going to be virtually identical between Gaulish and Welsh, which you can understand. Petsy is the word for thing. Petha, things in Welsh. Peth is a thing. That would be really easy to see. Penno is head, and it's pen in modern Welsh. So these are very identical. And you get ritu would be a reed that you cross in the woods, and this would be reed in Welsh. And so this is quite similar, but would you be able to understand it being spoken? Well, I guess that would determine on the context. One thing that would help you understand is that prepositions, words like on, towards, for, with, are very, very similar, often identical between Welsh and Gaulish. For instance, ar means on in Welsh, and in Gaulish, are. And this is going to be used throughout Welsh. in terms of connecting words, introducing verbs for different tense meanings, connecting phrases, and it appears that this is the same thing in Gaulish. So many words that are connected to each other via these prepositions would be very recognizable for Welsh speakers. Another one is ambi, which is the Gaulish word for or around. And in Welsh it's am, they just leave off the B at the end. So that would be very recognizable. Surprisingly, there are many adjectives which are quite similar to Welsh, between Welsh and Gaulish. Litano is the word for broad or quite broad and flat. In Welsh that's llydan, which is meaning broad or wide. There's a slight change of meaning, but you would obviously get what that means. It's the same thing. One of my favorite in this video was finding out what the word for star was in Gaulish. It's sirum, and in Welsh it's seran. And it appears like the plural for both would be ser or sir in Gaulish. And that's quite beautiful, how close they are. One thing I wanted to note in this video was that Gaulish in some cases is going to be quite similar or more similar to Breton, the language related to Welsh spoken in northwestern France or Brittany. And they, for instance, have a word called mat, which is the word for good, and that's the same exact word in Gaulish. So there are going to be quite a few similarities there, and there's been theories over the years that part of the Breton heritage was reassimilating a few Gaulish-speaking communities that were in Amorica. We don't know if that's true or not, but there's a possibility. It's not so simple, because here's what we have. We have graffiti inscriptions. We have some tablets, which I've gone into in my Gaulish video. We have a calendar that survived. We have references to Gaulish in Latin and Greek, and more so, early Gaulish inscriptions are in the Greek alphabet, not the Latin, and this influenced the Gaulish language in a way that it never did with Welsh. So that's what we have, and it's very scant. Welsh, on the other hand, is rich. It has an immense, long history of written literature. We know that during the long period in which Gaulish was spoken, as it came under influence of Latin, the word order began to change. In the early parts of its time, when it was a series of independent confederations of tribes, it had a verb-first word order, like Welsh does today. And this would have been more similar to what Welsh speakers are used to. Tafel sy'r bell, through the ball. You know, the verb comes first in many cases. As Latin was imposed upon Gaulish, this began to change. And so, if we want to say how similar these two languages are to each other, could Welsh speakers understand? When are we talking about here? That's going to have to be answered. And we can't really answer that, because there's not enough written evidence from any specific time period. We're looking at glimpses into various time periods across the centuries with a few etchings and engravings and markers of graffiti. Could Welsh speakers understand Gaulish? Well, it's not actually so simple, because the period of Gaulish lasted over 1,000 years, and we have to assess which part of that we're looking at. But we can't really do that because there's so much we don't have. Gaulish was more of a synthetic language. It had less standalone words. Things were more conjugated, more agglutinized, more endings attached on to various words. Like Brythonic was before Welsh emerged, and what breaking away from that grammatical trend was one of the things that made Welsh a separate language to the British language that was there before it, and people in many cases would not have been able to understand that. But there are many things that they would be able to understand. Some of our most vivid glimpses into Gaulish are actually bits of graffiti, quite vulgar. but this gives us more of a view into how people use the language in every day. And one of these inscriptions is I'm quite fond of, because it's actually really close to a tafodiaith word, or a dialect word in Welsh. Geneth, a fair young woman. And here we have this graffiti in Gaulish. Moni Ganatha. I'm not going to say what comes next. Geneta imi daga vimpi. And what that means is, my girl. And then I am a young girl, fair and pretty. And you can see, I'll put the translations side by side here, how similar they are. But would they be able to fully understand each other and have a conversation? I sincerely doubt it. They could make each other understood. They would know that their languages were deeply related, closer even than Welsh and Irish today in many senses. But with the passage of time and the influence of English upon Welsh, which is omnipresent today, the Gaulish speakers wouldn't be able to understand the Welsh, certainly, and so it would flow the other way too. To give a more direct answer, they would be able to understand bits, but any complex meanings would be completely lost, because the case system, the passage of time, new etymological roots passed into Welsh from languages which did not even exist yet, and because we don't know when we're talking about for Gaulish here, it lasted for 1,000 years, and we don't have any specific point of what it looked like permanently in a specific point in time. We have a fusion of time periods which gives us our knowledge of Gaulish, which doesn't tell us what it looked like, frankly. We don't know. Well, if you enjoyed this video, I hope that you'll give me a like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.